Sometimes it's just a rough day out on the water, kind of like some of the instances we'll see in this video coming up. Welcome back everyone to this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. As usual this past week I was scouring through social media just checking things out, and I ran across an article from a South Florida news station called Fast and the Furious. This particular article was referencing the increased use of personal watercraft during the pandemic as people search for a better way to socially distance but still get outside. But this particular station went on to say that the surge in personal watercraft use has given rise to a different kind of danger, and that's in comparison to the pandemic, which seems a little extreme in my opinion. They went on in this article to use some instances where personal watercraft owners have been caught on video doing some reckless and irresponsible things, such as running from the police, and you may recognize some of these images because I believe we even featured them here on Boating News of the Week when they occurred. Now I'm sure this story is partially accurate, as we probably have seen an increase in PWC accidents and incidents, but we've also seen a massive surge in ownership. They even asked a Florida wildlife officer what he thought about the increased usage in boats and PWCs in the water in South Florida, and his answer was pretty interesting.
It's definitely increased. Has it gotten a lot worse? Yeah, there's been a lot more out here. 95% of the problems out here come from these rentals.
I found this answer quite interesting because it is something I have noticed over the last year and a half. The amount of rental companies we see pulling skis into 79th Street where we film for the Miami Boat Ramps channel has drastically increased, which could have this officer onto more of a point. Not necessarily that it's the increased ownership, but it is exactly as they mentioned, the increased usage that is causing some issues. But that usage is coming from people having a little more free time, a little extra money, and doing a little more renting than necessarily actually owning a PWC. Many South Florida residents on many of the waterways down there have become frustrated with the increased usage of PWCs and really are trying to restrict this in many ways, but something many of these people probably need to look at is that rental market. It's not really fair to go out there and try and restrict every PWC owner when the reality is a good portion of the issues they're likely seeing are coming from people who are renting PWCs. The story itself really put most PWC owners and people who ride PWCs kind of in a poor light, and I really don't like seeing that about anybody who's out there on the water, as I do really feel we're all together, even though I know the comments are going to go crazy about me featuring a story like this. Where more research needs to come into these incidents is they need to pinpoint exactly where these incidents are coming from. So if, as the officer says, 95% of the issues he's seeing are coming from rental companies, instead of trying to ban PWCs in certain sections of waterways around South Florida, go ahead and look at those rental companies first and see if further restrictions need to be put on how that's handled before going ahead and penalizing everyone. Our next incident to make the boating news this week is going to be the MPV Everest. Now imagine this for just a few moments. You're in one of the most remote locations in the world, working on a ship pretty much isolated to yourself, and all of a sudden, this happens. This is exactly what happened to the Antarctic supply ship, the MPV Everest, a few weeks back when on a Monday at around 2 p.m. a fire was reported to have started in one of the main engine rooms. When the blaze started, the ship was en route from Mossall Station in the Australian Antarctic Territory to Hobart. At the time of the fire, the ship was approximately 1,700 nautical miles south of Perth and 5 days into a journey that was expected to last 14 days. Fortunately, none of the 109 crew members on board this vessel were injured during the blaze, but of course they immediately had to change course and start heading toward the nearest port, which was Fremantle, almost 1,400 nautical miles away, and they had to do so under one engine. The crew of the MPV Everest does eventually make it into Fremantle at a slow, grueling pace of 8 knots an hour, but I do have to imagine it was a traumatic experience for all those on board to be that far away from civilization and having a fire break out like that on the ship. Our next item to make the boating news this week is going to take us over the Anglesey coast in Wales, where some dramatic footage was released of the RNLI doing a heavy surf rescue when 2 surfers found themselves in trouble right off the coast. Lifeboat crews were alerted around 7:20 p.m. to the 2 surfers that were having difficulty off the coast. Fortunately, one of the surfers made it back to shore before the crews arrived, but the other surfer was still 100 yards off the coast near Cod Rock. The volunteer crew had to deal with rough seas, submerged rocks, and winds over 50 miles an hour. They were basically operating at the limit of the Atlantic 85 lifeboat they were in. Fortunately, they were able to make one pass, grab the surfer out of the water before she landed on the rocks, and get herself and them back to shore safely. Now just imagine having to retrieve your boat like this every time you go out. Our next item to make the boating news this week actually is quite the tragic event. It's going to take us over to near Tiki Island, Texas in the Galveston Causeway, where a 20-foot vessel carrying 5 passengers got caught in rough weather this past Friday and began to take on water. Not long after the storm passed, a Good Samaritan vessel happened to run across the boat, but nobody was on board. After further inspection around about 500 yards from the vessel, they found a 5-year-old child floating in the water with a life jacket on. The young child was able to tell this Good Samaritan vessel there were 5 total people on board the boat, but that he had witness his father go underwater and not come back up. The Good Samaritan vessel did begin a search for the other passengers and did recover 2 more who were wearing life jackets near the Galveston Causeway. The other 2 passengers who were missing were not wearing life jackets, and unfortunately the bodies were recovered 2 days later of those passengers. Coast Guard, after the incident, reminds people and urges them please double and triple check the weather before you head out, and also for everybody on board to wear a life jacket whenever possible. And one thing that can really help you out in a situation like this as well, if you ever find yourself in this spot, if at all possible, don't leave the vessel. The vessel is going to be your best sign of being discovered and rescued. And as you can see here, this vessel never actually sank. Most vessels will have some kind of flotation in them to keep them above water. Our most sincere condolences do go out to the families of the lost boaters. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening in your waterways, be sure to hit me up on Facebook or Instagram and let me know, and you might see your stories over here. Just like MT Jones UK1, Saul Davidson, and John Behrens did this week. And if you haven't already, go ahead and drop an anchor on the subscribe button here.